All right, guys. So it's been a while. This is my laptop. It's the only reason I got a cam anymore. We've been reducing the fleet down, all right. And we came in. We're trying to figure out what we're gonna do for the sale, the IE coming up. Reducing everything down to the bare basics, right? And we already reduced it quite a lot during the last video, I think. Getting rid of a Carrack and all of that, getting it down to the bare basics. But I think we also need to cut a Perseus and things like that. So we're going to go down to the bare essentials for basically an organization. So that's basically having a some sort of ship or item that is capable of dealing with a threat that you would interact with in the verse. So subcap, cap, all that down to ground. Still want to keep all of our transportation that we can, but until some of these capitals are finished, like the Kraken and ships like the Liberator are out, we don't know what exactly is going to be able to fit on top of them because I've seen pictures of, two or three cutlasses along the edge of a Kraken, and a Connie can technically fit in the same area space. So, we're also looking at potentially trying to slide one Vulcan into the fleet. So right now, what's going on is you'll have one Carrack, one Kraken, one Liberator. Then we will have one Perseus and one Polaris. And that is the basic makeup of the fleet itself. And then from there, all of our transport helicopters, transport vehicles, but we're going to be melting probably all of our Connies, all of that stuff at the beginning of the game. We'll keep a couple of Redeemers. We'll keep the Legionnaires. We'll keep the Eclipse, since we don't know exactly what fighters we can hold on the Kraken. We'll just have to wait until all that's done. Base concepts is going to be a bunch of arrows, potentially. We're going to try and keep the Valkyrie because we thought about... I was going to cut it. I was very tempted to cut it because it takes up the same space as two Connies, and also it's the price of two Connies. And I couldn't really think of a good reason why I would use it besides a Connie, because you could have two Tauruses for the same price. But then I got to thinking, the situations where you can't land in a safe spot, you have people trapped on the ground, you need to get them off the ground. I think that's where the Valkyrie would come in. So, after you did an assault, you have 20 guys on the ground, everything's looking bad, they need it off, and you're losing the fight, send in the Valkyrie. That's my thoughts on that right now. Potentially we get one Vulcan. I've been thinking about this a little bit. Basically, if your ships are damaged far away from your fleet and you're not going to be able to tow them in, the Vulcan can do repairs in the battlefield and also repairs on the damaged ships on the ground. Can do a little bit of transport, fairly armored, some basic guns, and also I was thinking about if you get quantum interdicted. So if you send say you send 6 arrows or whatever to support a ground force, and then someone quantum interdicts your arrows, well, all you can really do is try to send in backup. But you could also send in a Vulcan, and then the Vulcan could rearm and refuel the arrows mid-fight, so they could stay in the fight and use more missiles and things before they get shot down. I thought that was potentially an interesting concept. But also, if someone needs help out in the verse, you can send a Vulcan instead. If you have some ground ops doing something, or you need to extend the range of a transport helicopter or something away from the fleet, could be good. And if ground vehicles ever get to the point where they take fuel, then that could potentially also be a good option, using a Vulcan to refill those. But The main thing is that it gives the Liberator refuel, rearm, and repair capabilities, which allows basically the Kraken would be the main repair and refuel station, but the Liberator would essentially be able to act as a ground base just with that on top of it. And then uh, if the Kraken goes down, you still have some way to repair and refuel all of that. The Crucible I still want to keep just because I'm interested in repair and I also like towing. So Crucible and the SRV combo. Then when it comes to ground bases, you could always, transport one of those in and lay it down. I don't know if I would keep it part of the fleet. But then we really got interested into the Carrack, so I kept thinking about medical facilities when it comes to the fleet. And I keep thinking about the Galaxy because the Galaxy is going to be coming out pretty soon. And so I figured if I got the Galaxy, you can get, I believe it's like 3 tier 1s, 3 tier 2s, and 1 tier 1, or maybe it's a sort of combination of beds that you can get medical beds. And it would be good to have access to a tier 1 medical bed, I think, when it comes to a ship. But I'm not too particularly keen on requiring a full crew to fly a Galaxy around. And then if the tier 1 medical bed isn't capable of dealing with all of the injuries, then we already have a problem anyway when it comes to that. And then I got to thinking about, um, if you have to transport people from a battlefield to a hospital, that's what the military does in the real world. From what I understand, with the amphibious assault groups, you basically have medical personnel that keep people alive and transport them to tier 2 stations, and then the tier 2 stations perform surgery to help stabilize them, and then you transport them to a hospital to get them fully recovered. And if that's what the game ends up doing, one tier 1 bed might not be good enough for a really big battlefield. It might be good enough for small things. Same sort of thing with the Apollo. So I was tempted to try and get an Apollo, stick it on top of the Liberator, but you're looking at a crew of like 6 for either of those ships. I think the Apollo is probably less, probably like 2 or 4 or something. So it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. But when we look at the Endeavor and the fact that it's a full hospital, even if it took 10 crew, you wouldn't have to fully staff that all the time. All you'd have to do is fly it into place and park it by the Kraken. And since we cut a Carrack and we cut a Perseus, we have extra crew that we could spread to the Endeavor. And so that's kind of something. And then you can't always guarantee that you'll have access to a hospital depending on where you set up. So having an Endeavor around is just going to be good to do that in general. And also, if we do ever want to set up a base or a space station out in space, that's pretty much the ship that you would need to help facilitate that anyway. So not that big of a deal. Now we get to the Carrack though, because we still needed a way to do in-field recovery in hospitals. And I kept thinking about this a lot. And then I was basically thinking the Carrack has modules, and there was talks a long time ago about the Carrack potentially having medical modules, and that would be good. But then I basically got to thinking, well, we don't really need a medical module on the Carrack because as long as they fix the cargo modules to where they go to the ground, all you would need is Ursa rovers. And if you think about this, because I was already planning to use the Carrack as a drop ship, basically, a drop vehicle for Ursa rovers, and it can hold up to 8. So with 6 people, it's 48 people potentially. Then I was thinking about cutting that down to 6 to free up the front bay for some other transportation craft, some stuff like that. You could put Argo cargos in the front, free up some room, use the Argo cargos to transport things back to the Carrack. And that would give you 6 Ursas, so 36 people that you could drop at a time. But essentially, I was thinking, you could send in 15 and then send in 15 if they died, and you'd have backup Ursas for that. But then when you really start thinking about the Ursa, the only real difference is one has a medical bed and the other one has extra seats. So a regular Ursa can hold 6 people with no medical functionality. Two medical Ursas can do 6 people with medical functionality. So there's not really, I mean, unless we just want less guns on the ground, less Ursas, um, or we need to carry cargo specifically with the Ursa, there's not really any reason to use a regular Ursa over the medical Ursas because we can call in transport helicopters. We have Redeemers and Connies and Valkyries and PC's aircraft. We can haul the cargo back. I mean, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. As long as we don't lose the Connies, we should be able to handle that fine. And then when it comes to the Connies, you could still use regular Ursa rovers with those because since they're not part of the Carrack or whatever, and you can only transport one or two with those ships, then bringing normal Ursa rovers would make more sense because you can fit more people in a smaller space. So that would be good. But going back to the Carrack, that means potentially you could have 8 size 1 beds in Ursas on board and a size 1 medical PCs up top, and then a size 2 medbed inside. So you're already looking at 8 medical beds and 2 recovery beds on the Carrack. So potentially, if you filled up the whole Carrack with 8 medical Ursas, that would be 24 potential people that you could drop off in one go. So you'd have squads of 3 in 8 separate medical Ursas, which is sounds pretty decent. So you'd have 24 people on the ground, and then if you had injuries, so if you had 8 injuries out of those 24, you would need 8 drivers and 8 Ursas to come back, and you would still have 8 people on the ground, which is fair enough, I think. I mean, that's okay. That's not that bad. And then if you didn't run to send 24, then you could just do, um, 6 Ursas. So you'd have 18 people, and then you could free up the front bay for like Titan suits or whatever else on the Carrack. But essentially, I was thinking how like before I started thinking about the medical Ursas, I was thinking how could you send in 48 people into a fight, and let's say they get hit by a bomb, and you have all those people injured that need serious medical care, but you only have like one tier 1 bed or a few tier 2 beds. You need to be able to transport a massive amount of injured casualties out of a war zone and get them back to civilian life. And the Apollos are small, they can't carry that many people. They're not as armored. Not sure if they would hold up in a combat situation, even the medevac. The Galaxies are big, but they only have, they have 6 or 7 beds, I believe, inside. Um, then you would have a medical PCs potentially that could be in the back and a medical rover that you could stick in there potentially. So you're looking at 8 to 9 beds in the Galaxy, which isn't bad. And the Galaxy's looks are kind of growing on me, but the Galaxy wouldn't have the scanner potential. It wouldn't have the ability to traverse jump points as well as the Carrack. So if if your group goes through a unexplored jump point and then gets in trouble and needs medical help, I would trust a Carrack to go through unexplored jump points more than a Galaxy or anything else. Also, the Galaxy can't be used as a drop ship on a planet's surface with Ursas or anything like that. And not requiring a Galaxy around kind of frees up extra crew because Galaxy has a minimum crew of 6, I believe, as well. So it's in a similar vein to the Carrack, but it doesn't seem to have as much general use as the Carrack. Like I could just get a second Carrack and put the medical Ursas on that. But basically, as long as I have the medical Ursas, I don't necessarily need the Galaxy for medical beds. But that also frees up the potential of the Liberator being used as a medical station. So the way to think about this is that if we equate this to real world stuff, the tier 3 medical beds would be used to deal with minor injuries and stuff and stabilizing seriously injured patients. Then you get them to the tier 2 medical beds, which would be for surgery that would stabilize a severely injured patient until they can get to a tier 1 bed. So in the fleet design right now, you would have potentially 9 tier 1 beds on the Carrack. And then those tier 1 beds are Ursas so that they're able to do other things. They're able to do combat. They're able to move troops around. All that good stuff. Then you would have one size 2 bed on the Carrack, 2 size 2 beds on the Polaris. Don't know how many recovery beds on the Polaris, but there's 2 on the Carrack, so maybe there's 4 on the Polaris, or maybe there's none. But you basically have 3 surgery beds there, and then you would have however many medical beds end up on the Carrack or the Kraken, since they had said that the medical beds will probably be on the Kraken. It was just an oversight in the past, and that was one of the vehicle devs. So if that's the sense, if we say that the Kraken has, let's say, 2 medical beds and they're size 2s, um, I think, that's okay. And that's if they decide to give them size 2s. We'll figure that the Banu Merchantman right now is said to have, the Banu Merchantman has a size 1 bed, or it has one size 2 bed. The Kraken, I don't know what that would have because it carries other ships on top of it. I would say, so let's say at least one size 2, maybe 2 size 2s, and if we're lucky, maybe they'll give us a lot more since it's a carrier ship. But essentially, if it has one size 2, then I would have 4 size 2 beds that could do medical surgery, which seems fairly adequate, I would guess. And then if we have 5, that'd be fine as well. Carrack lands, let's say that you send half of your force out at a time on the Carrack, so you'd have 4 medical Ursas go out with 12 people. So there's 3 people in each medical Ursa. You send out 12. Um, so they can go out and do all that. And then if they respawn, put them in the other half of the medical Ursas, send those medical Ursas out. And then just basically, when people are seriously injured, they'd load them into the medical Ursas, drive them back, get picked up by transports, or loaded back up on the Carrack. PC's aircraft come down, grab them, move them to the tier 2 beds so they can get medical surgeries. The ones that are seriously injured are stabilized and kept around, and then the ones that are put back into action can go back into action. And then as the tier 2 beds and the recovery beds and stuff get filled up, you start filling up the medical Ursas with injured. And then eventually, when you get to the point where you need to transport the injured personnel, the Carrack again would have the potentially 9 size 1s and the 1 size 2 and the 2 recovery beds. So you're looking at 10 to 12 beds potentially, and then they could just fly to the Endeavor, stick people in there, and get them the proper medical treatment that they need. And then if the Carrack went down, you could still load people probably on the Kraken and move the Kraken over there, or the Liberator if you have enough medical PCs or medical Ursa, you could just load people on that and then use that to get back to the Endeavor potentially. So that would make more sense in the grand picture of things. It also reduces the crew count down a decent bit. So uh, it does free up a little bit of crew potentially for us to slide in a Starfarer, which that's basically the decision that we're starting to run into is if we don't take a Galaxy, we can potentially slide in a Starfarer, and it has the same crew requirements as a Perseus, but it would allow us to have way more fuel capabilities for our ships. Even if it can't mine quantum fuel, the potential to hold quantum material on a ship, and we don't know how much quantum material can be turned into quantum fuel, but if it is a decent amount per quantum material, it could be good. But also with the Kraken, that means that you could just store excess quantum material on the Kraken itself and transport it over to the Starfarer and use the Starfarer to produce the quantum fuel that you need. So in the end, just having the ability to produce the fuel is kind of in and of itself useful, especially if you can produce excess. But it also just means that you could take extra Starfarer containers with you and then have a whole bunch of them in the Kraken and then just refuel your stuff with that as you go along. We have to see what happens, but essentially you need at least 6 crew for the Carrack. I think 10 or so for the Kraken, 2 for the Liberator, 6 for the Perseus. So you're looking at 24 right there, and then you need 12 for the Polaris. So you're looking at 36 people without NPC crew over those 5 ships. And the base level smallest amphibious strike group starts at 5 ships as well, I believe, because they have basically you have your amphibious ships, which there's 3, and then they have 2 escorts when things get a little bit more serious, and then anything above that was just excess. And then the Starfarer, if we bring that along, would basically just be your cargo, your extra supplies, your supply ship to come in and help you, and it could just chill with the Endeavor. So Starfarer and the Crucible and the Endeavor are all kind of excess that we don't really need, but potentially could be something that's good to have. And just produce your own fuel or whatever before you leave or anything like that. Same thing goes with the Reclaimer. I want to keep at least one Reclaimer, even though I had plans on having multiple, and it can make money. It's useful to have. It's part of the industry. So I'm not opposed to having those ships, but the Endeavor would be the main one. So the bulk of those 5 ships are going to be, 36 crew, and then the Endeavor, let's say, is another 10, so it'd put us at 46. And the base fleet that we had before was 50, so we're still floating around the similar amount, but we have a lot more flexibility in what we can do. The only problem with the fleet design is that we don't have any redundancy really with that many. You just have just enough of any one ship to do any one thing, and as soon as you lose one of those, you're gonna have some problems. But I guess at that point you just got to lick your wounds and deal the job and then start getting back. But that's going to give us the ground base 0 of a fleet. And then from there, we will earn the other half or any expanding ships in the game. So we'll have to earn another Carrack, which we would probably turn 1 Carrack into a medical transport Carrack and 1 Carrack into a troop drop Carrack. And that would basically allow us to drop way more units on the ground and still transport plenty of them back to the Endeavor. And since the Carrack has, pretty good fuel capabilities and range, all of that, armor, also extra gun compared to the Galaxy, so 4 guns instead of 3, um, and extra utility for ground troops like component repairs and stuff like that. It makes more sense for me to get a second Carrack than anything else for the most part. Especially if 1 Carrack goes down, it means that you could just replace 1 Carrack with the other Carrack and be fine. Then we'll need to earn a second Perseus in game. That way, Perseus goes down, it's good, but also it would just allow us to keep like one Perseus by the Endeavor or whatever, and then one Perseus there, or you can keep one Perseus on the ground if you started a ground force or whatever. So that's the general gist of the fleet. When it comes for the fighters and everything else, we are basically melting most of our fighters and our starter ships that we know we're not certain if can fit on those ships. Um, because I'm just not sure how viable they are. And we're also potentially looking at a gladiator. We're tempted to do the sabers because the sabers would give you, instead of the firebirds, doing the actual base sabers. And the reason I was starting to swap over to that is because the saber firebird can only use size 3 barrages of missiles. And I got to thinking about the flexibility of the missiles themselves. And realistically, if you want to do a 6 missile barrage on a ship on the ground with one ship, the Firebird would be good. But the arrows can also carry size 3 missiles. And so you'd need 3 arrows to do 6 size missile span, and then a Vulcan could just restock their size 3 missiles. So you could still do strike missions with these other ships. It would just require a little bit more logistics. And I like being like, it's not that I necessarily care about making things overcomplicated, but I do like the interaction between players and the community that you could build doing that. I think that is a nice thing. But then when you look at the base saber, because a lot of people are going for the saber over the base saber, and I still like the base saber's looks. But there's a few things that I read. One of them is twin jet engines in the real world are more expensive to operate than single, jet engines. But apparently it's redundancy, because if one engine goes down, the ship can still fly. So the base Saber has double engines compared to a Saber Raven or Saber Firebird, so that's a plus. It looks like it has better handling still. Originally, it had higher stealth than the Firebird until people complained about it. So if there ever was a nerf to the Firebird again, I would assume that the base Saber would keep that. The other things, it still has 4 main guns, so twice as much as the Saber, which makes it better potentially at picking a fight against other ships or doing a strafe run against another ship. And then when we look at the missile packages, the base Saber can still carry 4 size 3 missiles, which is fine. And then if you had multiple sabers, like say you had 2 sabers and you're looking at 8 size 3s, it can carry size 2 and size 1 missiles, but also can carry size 4 missiles, which the base saber can't. And when you're looking at this, you might be thinking, well, why would you care about size 4 missiles? Because there's plenty of videos out on the internet that show that the smaller missiles are better than the bigger missiles because they deal more total damage. But that isn't the biggest picture. The biggest picture is the flexibility. If you have ships that can use multiple different sizes of missiles while you're exploring the universe, it means that you can swap out missile racks to equip the missiles that you find in the universe, which allows you to have a little bit more flexibility, but also the ranges of the missiles. So, size 1 missiles do a lot of damage, and they also move faster, and they have lower lock on ranges, which is another thing. So, the size 1 missiles are better for close range engagements between fighters. Size 2 missiles are anti air missiles and stuff, which means that all the like a lot of the anti-air ground vehicles shoot size 2 missiles. So a size 2 missile has better range than a size 1 missile, which is fine and good. Potentially better than size 1s depending. But you just don't have as many. But the range is the biggest thing. So a size 3 missile will have more range than a size 2 missile, which means if you're using size 3 missiles, you're going to be able to shoot them and spam size 3s at a farther distance than a size 2 would be. But that wouldn't necessarily help you all that much unless you have a very big stockpile of size 3 missiles. or something like that. But what it does help you with is dealing with targets that have bigger missiles. So if ground vehicles have size 2 missiles and you use size 3 missiles, then you can shoot those missiles from a farther distance than the size 2s would, unless the size 2s are untargetable, which that would be yet to see. And then the size 4 missiles are basically going to be things that are really far ranged that could beat out size 3 missiles and also potentially deal with like tanks and things like that. Or let's say like vehicles on the ground. But now the debate rages on because Saber would have stealth capabilities, able to get in and also shoot a decent amount of missiles, decent in combat, things like that. But I'm also looking at the Gladiator now because we lost a Perseus. Um, we could potentially lose our ability to shoot size 5 torpedoes. And we also won't have the ability to just send in a Perseus um, to shoot size 5 torpedoes at a ship, which makes having a bomber on board a little bit more interesting to use. But I would prefer to have more than just 2 or 3 fighters on a ship. Even though, 5 fighters, I think, is generally what a lot of these aircraft carriers are using. So there's trade-offs that are going to be happening there. But the arrows, if we can hold 3 arrows on one pad, that'd be good. And then if we could hold 1 gladiator and 2 sabers, I think that could potentially be good as well. But we have to think about the Gladiator. Any case, I think we will earn all of the fighter jets in game and not buy them because we can make do with arrows until we figure out what can fit on those pads. So we could have anywhere between 6 to 12 arrows potentially on those 4 pads. If the 2 Redeemers end up taking up 2 pads, we'll still have 6 arrows, and those 6 arrows can all use size 3 missiles, which is good. And if you needed to transport arrows or something in, you could, and it wouldn't be as big of a deal. Also cheaper in game to earn. They're starter ships, so it's more likely for us to find people with arrows than other ships at the beginning of the game. And then a lot of our fleet is still going to have uh, uh, Perseus and stuff like that, or not Perseus, PCs, aircraft transports. So all that'd be good. And then reducing the Redeemers down to 2, it does kind of hurt because I like the idea of having 4 Redeemers on top of a Kraken to have as much turret firepower as possible around it and having backup Redeemers in case something gets shot down. But I think 2 would be fine. If we got 4, I would probably try and drop a Valkyrie or something. Would be the only thing I could think of. And I'm still holding on with the Valkyrie. I think maybe I should cut it, but I also think it's a really nice looking ship and it's sort of flexible maybe. It's very difficult to say, but because 2 Redeemers, I mean they have 4 jump seats, 4 beds. So you could potentially drop off a decent amount of people, but I think 2 attack helicopters, if you're not using them all the time, they become a tool and not so much a thing that you're using 24/7, which I think is probably better. Reduces the wear and tear and all of that. And then with the 2 Legionnaires that we have, they can also technically be used as transports and a lighter escort helicopter if need be for ground cover. So I don't really think there's going to be any major reason that we need 4 Redeemers off the top of my head. Transporting the people around and vehicles around is probably going to be a much bigger deal. And having, you know, 2 to 4 Connies and a Valkyrie, or 6 Connies probably would be better, especially with, well, one, just transporting ground troops around in smaller units instead of dropping things off and only having one transport. And with the nerf to the Redeemer's guns, the Connies still have access to size 5 weapons, which could be useful in dealing with some smaller craft that we don't necessarily need to use size 5 missiles on. So, or torpedoes, or the Perseus. So, Gladiator is a possibility. Um, but I think we'd probably just stick with arrows. If the arrows have extra deck space and we can get them off of those pads, then that would potentially free up 2 pads, and I could see running either 2 gladiators or 2 sabers. I would probably lean towards 2 sabers. Size 5 torp is probably overkill for Connies and Corsairs and stuff, and probably decent against things like Perseus and Hammerheads, etc. But I don't think it's something that you would necessarily need to call in all the time to deal with big threats when you're on the ground. I think most of the time you should just be able to call in the Perseus or the Polaris. If they're upgunning the Polaris and it gets size 6s or size 7s, that's already a decent amount. And then all the Connies have size 5s. The Carrack has size 5 now, I believe. So that's already a decent amount to deal with, the smaller ships. And then the size 7s would just rip one of those ships in half, probably. So, yeah. Basically, that's the minimized version of the fleet that I can think of. Reduces the total amount of potential minimum crew to about 38 for the base ships. And then if we are cutting the Polaris and the Perseus out, and we just go to the base expeditionary group without escorts, you're looking at 6 for the Carrack, 2 for the Liberator, and then like 10 for the Kraken. So that's only like 18 to 20 people for 3 ships, and then you would still have a lot of transports, a lot of firepower with Connies and missiles. You just wouldn't have basically the Kraken would be your big guns at that point if you're going to do anything. But I gotta go, and we'll see what happens this next week. But ideally, we're going to be looking for a few things to during the sale, and then potentially trying to grab the Kraken this sale. But melting all of our Connies and our fighters and all of that down into credits is going to save us more total money for the main 2 purchases, or the main 3 purchases. So essentially, you got the Crackus, Polaris, and the Endeavor. The Kraken and the Polaris is already going to be like $2,100 basically. Melting the Aquila will give us the ability to buy an Endeavor potentially, and then melting our fighters gives us the ability to potentially grab another Legionnaire and a Vulcan, and then we might have enough still for a Starfarer. Um, it depends, because we can still melt one of the Redeemers that we bought and then buy back a pledge that I had from the original Redeemer sales, which would give me basically another $100, $150 in credit. So we might be able to grab a Starfarer off one of those, but probably looking for a Gemini. So we'll see if that's for sale. But we do have a Gemini in the buyback. I just don't want to spend any more money if I can avoid it. So we'll try and get LTI tokens or whatever, and then transition CCU up to a Gemini, and all that, and get it good. And then we should be set after that. We'll earn all the fighters, we'll earn the Connies, we'll earn the bombers, we'll earn the other Carrack, we'll earn the other Perseus and stuff in game, and then we should be set at that point for whatever. But the base setup should be good for, you know, that 20 to 40 player org. Um, so anywhere from 20 to 100 players we should be able to handle, and that seems like a fairly solid starting, you know, org thing. And then, you know, if we don't find people that have arrows, or we don't buy arrows at the very beginning, surely we'll find some guys that have like Mustang betas or whatever else, stick it on there. You know, you use what you got when you got it, and we'll upgrade. And then the Connies are supposed to be fairly common. Cutlass Blacks are supposed to be fairly common. So if we have to get some of those early game ships and steal them, or find other people that have them, pretty much everyone has a Connie. So if I can just find like four people with Connies, I'll just stick them on there until we earn enough money to move up. It isn't going to be that big of a deal. But the Liberator, the Kraken, the Carrack, the Polaris, and the Perseus are the big ones, because you got anti-fighter support, you got anti-subcap support, you got anti-cap support, you got troop transports, medical beds, all that. So you should be good. Y'all guys have a good one, and I'll see y'all probably next week, because I still got a few hours here and another, 12 plus hour shift tomorrow. So